Happy Cinco de Mayo, people. Party it up. Fiesta time. All right. I mentioned that I was going to go through this unbelievably interesting, intricate, salacious report, Treatment for Pediatric Gender Dysphoria, by the Department of Health and Human Services. It was put out, this 400-page bad boy. First of all, yeah, it is 400 pages, but I would say half of that, probably footnotes and that kind of thing. And guess what? I did it. I went through it, and then I also went through a couple of the reports. I'm looking over here because they're sitting over here. A couple of the reports that it mentions or cites as evidence or backup for their views. It was hard, guys. It was really hard. And you know why? I don't think it's any surprise where I fall on the spectrum of rights for transgender youth and gender-affirming care. So when I read something that almost every sentence I read I personally disagreed with, I got angry, and it was really challenging to finish. But I did. And because, like I always say, who am I to argue against someone else's argument if I don't understand the backup for their views? That's just ignorant, right? So, I did it. It sucked, but I did it. So, couple things. How did this report even come to be? If you guys remember, in January, President Trump issued a flurry of executive orders. A handful of those were very, very specifically targeted at transgender youth and gender-affirming care, and targeting that by saying that it needs to be reviewed, that surgical care in these instances is considered genital mutilation. There's a lot of strong language in it. As a result of that executive order, he ordered a review. This is that review. That was a result of that, okay? So that's what that is. I'm not going to go through every single thing, okay? I could talk until I lose my voice again. Don't feel like doing that. I don't think you want me to either. So I'm going to kind of summarize and then just talk about it, right? And give my views and evidence and that kind of thing. So, what is this report even about, right? It's about transgender youth. And in the title, you hear something, gender dysphoria. You may or may not know what that means. Basically, how I think of it as gender dysphoria is when you don't feel comfortable in your own body. So you might identify differently than what your anatomy suggests. Do you know how hard that must be? How confusing that must be? You don't feel that you fit into your own body. That's gender dysphoria. So, what this report does is provide recommendations and a review of what medical interventions, if any, are appropriate, based on their opinion, for youth who experience gender dysphoria, right? So, what are a couple of things they said? I'm just going to keep looking at my notes because I want to make sure I get this right. Number one, they say that gender dysphoria, being transgender, is not something that can be seen on an X-ray or blood work, and is therefore subjective and based on opinion. Okay? Another thing they say, a big part of their argument, is that any of the work that has been done in the past, medically, either doesn't have enough evidence behind it, or it hasn't been done specifically for the youth community versus the adults. They quote, say, deep uncertainty exists of the benefits of any type of medical intervention. Another thing, they talk a lot about something called a rapid onset gender dysphoria, ROGD. They use a lot of acronyms. There's literally like dozens of pages of definitions. So, anyway, this idea that all of a sudden, all of these kids are saying that they're transgender or have gender identity issues, that it's like this rush or flood happening. And then another thing they say is they start talking about treatment. And their view is that the only real treatment option is psychotherapy. not medical intervention, not hormones, puberty blockers, surgery. All right, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. So, based on opinion, not lab work, x-rays, since when has someone's sexual identity been found in an x-ray? I mean, I don't know. It just seems like a strange thing to say, a random thing to say, something a non-medical person would say. So are you saying then that my depression is not a medical condition? Are you saying mental health issues that I can't potentially look at in blood work are not medical issues? Beg to differ. Evidence, deep uncertainty in the benefits of medical intervention. You know, since I don't know who authored this report, I will instead go to trusted sources of information like the American Academy of Pediatrics or WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Both of these organizations, medical doctors who are experienced in this, who have the training and have reviewed evidence saying that gender affirming care is health care for these kids, and that it's absolutely necessary. And in fact, the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, put out a report in 2018 stating just that. And in 2023, they reaffirmed their study after an additional 5 years of medical-based evidence and review. I'll take that. WPATH. They put out a standard of care report. By the way, WPATH is an international nonprofit organization of 4,000 professional members. Their standard of care guide is considered, I don't want to say the Holy Grail or the Bible, but you will see it referenced even in medical journals in terms of the best treatment of care for transgender youth. They also not only align with the Pediatric Association in terms of medical care for transgender youth, but they, along with the American Academy of Pediatrics, boldly refuted this report within 48 hours. That it did not contain accurate information, but also that it cited some of their reports inaccurately. Rapid onset. Why all of a sudden are all these kids saying that they're transgender or they're having gender identities? Well, it's not really the case, right? Let's think about it. In society, if who you are, who you identify as is not accepted, you are bullied, you are harassed, there's violence, some people's homes are not even supportive of these type of individuals and lives. When that starts changing and you start having a more inclusive environment, whether that be at school, whether that be at your pediatrician's office, or whether that be at home, you will see a rise in number of people who identify that way. So no, not like the report said. It's not because of social media and people want to be cool and people want to all of a sudden be different and trendy. No, that's not how this works. Look back in history, okay? I don't care whether it's being gay, whether it's interracial marriage, whether it's women's voting rights. I don't care what it is. There's a tipping point where all of a sudden people catch on and the right thing is done and people feel more comfortable coming forward with who they truly are. That's what's happening. Treatment, only psychotherapy, really. So no medical intervention whatsoever. Let's talk about that. Psychotherapy. Some people are saying that's code word for conversion therapy, which is just cruel. Talking people out of being who they truly are. They're claiming that that's not what they're talking about, but that instead it's just intensive therapy where you talk through the reasons for how you came to the decision that who you feel in terms of gender does not match with your birth sex or what was assigned to you at birth. It sounds a lot like conversion therapy to me. So, where do I come out on all of this? It's kind of long. It's telling, there's no author. I find it interesting. They call it a treatment, like a treatment plan, like they're actually diagnosing kids. At the end of their summary, I'm not going to get it right, but the most interesting part is it says, here we go, it is not a clinical practice guideline and it does not issue legislative or policy recommendations. So someone opinion, right? Someone who's not a medical professional, someone who's not a pediatrician, someone who most likely doesn't even know transgender youth, right? Someone's opinion. So, where do we go from here? Well, let's take a step back. You know, how many transgender people are there even in the United States, right? And that's even hard to quantify, because as you talked about before, there's a fear factor of coming forward. But the numbers are small, but growing, right? So, 1 to 2% of the adult population, 0.5% of the minor population, kind of a guesstimate, right? But when you start looking into this stuff, you start looking into medical treatment specifically and how effective it is for this community, there are some things to understand, right? In terms of mental health and the need. It's not just puberty blockers, hormones, surgeries. It's the mental health aspect. So National Institute of Health put out a study. They said 82% of the transgender community had thought about committing suicide. Over 40% had tried. I would argue that's probably higher than almost any subset of the population. So don't tell me that mental health isn't important. Let's talk about the medical interventions really quickly, and then I'll let you go. Puberty blockers. What do they do? What are they? Well, this was a lot of education for me as well. Puberty blockers, I look at this in kind of a couple of stages, right? Based on the kid's age. Puberty blockers first, hormone therapy second, third, surgery if that's wanted. Can we debunk something on the surgery? First of all, most institutions here in the United States will not provide any gender-affirming surgeries to minors, period. The total number is almost minuscule. There wasn't even anyone in a minor, I think in 2019, that even had surgery. So the fact that thousands of kids are being mutilated is bullshit. It doesn't happen. For the few cases, I mean, it's almost immeasurable in terms of, I think it's like less than 0.5% of all surgeries are performed on minors, even that. So can we just put that out the window for a minute? So the other two things, puberty blockers. This is something that, by the way, is reversible. This part is reversible. It puts the pause button on puberty for a child who is suffering from gender dysphoria. Pushes the pause button. What does that mean? They just stop. So whatever gender they were assigned at birth, let's say it's a transgender boy who was born as sex female, it pauses periods, breast development for a period of time, right? So that individual who at that point associates their own identity as a boy does not have to go through puberty as a girl. That doesn't mean that they never go through puberty, okay? So let's move on to the next step. If that person chooses to, there's a couple pathways, right? That person and their family and their caregivers decide. Should that person decide to stop the puberty blockers, they will resume puberty kind of where they stopped, okay? If that person and family and support group decide that the next best step is hormones, that is the next step. Testosterone or estrogen. Now what does that do? That would then initiate puberty for that individual of the sex that they identify with. Let that sink in a little bit, okay? as youth and transgender, this person still goes through puberty, but instead of having to go through it twice, how much would that suck? 2 times. They can go through it 1 time as the gender that they identify with. So hopefully that broke it down. To me, it's pretty simple. To me, it doesn't sound like mutilation. To me, it doesn't sound like kids are going to school and schools are bringing them back at different genders and hiding it from their parents. That's not what I see at all. I see kids who from a very, very young age, as young as 2 if not earlier, express themselves in different ways. And it's very obvious to not only them, but people around them, that they most likely do not identify gender-wise with their sex assigned at birth. This is not a light bulb moment. This is not a eureka, I figured it out, everyone on TikTok is doing this. Absolutely not. These are kids who have gone through a lot of mental strife. I would bet a lot have been bullied and have felt different and just want to be noticed and recognized. So, again, I will say this wholeheartedly. I am with you. I got you. I will do my best to educate folks on what exactly is going on and not twist the facts with opinions and that sort of thing. When it comes to medical information, I will rely on the experts. That's not my field of expertise. But I will find people who that is their area of expertise, and I will trust them in terms of their opinion. And I know firsthand how critical and important it is for transgender youth to receive holistic care. So not just medical intervention, but therapy as well. Support groups. It's important. It's a holistic solution. So, again, knowledge is power. Try to dig deeper. Try to understand this stuff. Understand what's really going on. And be kind. Please be kind. Be supportive. It's okay to not agree on things, but it's not okay to disrespect people, especially for who they are and how they just want to live. Okay? Enjoy the rest of your Cinco de Mayo, folks. Take care. It's good to be back. Sorry about the voice. Have a good night.